Welcome back to the Public Relations Podcast. I have another guest on today, and I have to say this is an absolutely fascinating person. It's Elie Jacobs from Purposeful Advisors, who has had a fascinating career. We've been speaking on email, and he started off in political offices. He's been into business. He's done all kinds of other things. There's so many things we can talk about. I'm just going to go straight into this because we've got 15 minutes. So, Elie, first of all, very quickly, please say hello, and then tell us about some of the campaigns you're working on at the moment.
Sure. It's great to be with you. We work on a variety of different things with clients that we can talk about, clients that we can't talk about. I think, one of the things that we're focused on now is working with a couple interesting up and coming brands and getting them the right exposure in the right ways. And I'm sure we're going to talk about what that means. But also we're spending a lot of time with clients working through kind of what the risk map that they face is, right? Like reputational risk is kind of the big thing right now. Edelman has kind of destroyed what the meaning of trust is. If trust is everything, trust is nothing.
Love the way
but it really does come down to reputation. And there are things that you can, mark out about what reputation is and what those risks are. Risks, issues, and crises are three different things, but are obviously intertwined.
And that's the big thing that people are asking you about at the moment, or that you're having to point out to them, look, you've got to take this seriously, mate.
Both, really. I mean, if we had clients coming to us asking for that specifically, we'd be, I'd be driving a Lamborghini. So it's a lot of trying to convince clients that they need to be paying attention to risks before they become crises. So I'll give you I'll give you sort of the 10,000 foot idea of what that looks like. Yeah. So that there's a risk in air travel. There's an objective risk in air travel, right? You're defeating gravity, there's air pressure, all these other kinds of things, right? That's a risk that you're doing by getting on an airplane. There are issues associated with air travel as well. If there's a storm, if the pilot had a bad night or whatever else it is, or if you're flying on a Boeing plane, right? That might be becoming a little dated. I hope that Boeing is sort of working these things through.
Fingers crossed. That's
and
a
then
question in itself.
The crisis is when the door blows off. Right? So that is something that is probably predictable. That's something that horrible could happen. It may not be preventable, but it's predictable. So if you start at the risk side of that kind of graduate, you can start identifying things that are risks, that are objective risks, subjective issues, and then, kind of worst case scenario crises. And you
so
can
what
start
are you
putting
actually
things in...
saying to the clients on the ground, though? Because, the biggest problem with crisis comms is that no one needs crisis comms until you're in a crisis.
Until they have a crisis, yeah. No one gets credit for preventing something from not happening.
We've heard lots of different sort of versions of what people try to do to explain to people. How do you approach it?
You approach it by saying basically like, you can pay us a lot more money when something does go bump in the night, or we can spend some time with you now and work through from that objective, subjective, and crisis point of view of the things that you're facing inherently based on the industry that you're in, subjectively based on geopolitical situations or your direct competitors, and then start identifying what those crises could be. Again, maybe not preventable, but certainly predictable if you're creative enough. And this is where I think a lot of crisis comms people and certainly in-house people get caught up, is they're just not creative enough. They kind of get stuck in this mindset, oh, that'll never happen. Yeah. No, the thing that you don't think is going to happen is the thing that's going to happen. And if you have a plan in place, it doesn't prevent it from happening, but there's a way to at least mitigate the challenges that you're going to face when it does happen.
But it's also the scope of the kind of businesses that are being attacked now, isn't it? Because in the past, it was only really the kind of the top companies that were being noticed. But now with the rise of bots online in particular, automated bots on Twitter or whatever, or X or whatever it's currently called, with all that kind of thing, anyone can very easily be attacked now.
That's the biggest problem. And I think one of the reasons that, to take many steps back, we're Purposeful Advisors, and that name is not picked because, we're telling clients to go donate to a food bank or plant trees. Like, that is a purpose, and that's great, and we would never dissuade clients from doing that. We're not necessarily the right people to give that kind of advice. When we talk about purpose, it's about defining what your purpose is. It's going back to the why you're doing what you're doing, not the how or the what, but the why, what you're doing. Because if you actually define your purpose early on and continue that as sort of the baseline of everything that you do externally from point one straight through to a 100-year-old company, it helps you to control your narrative. And if you can control your narrative, that makes any kind of incoming situation at least a little bit easier to control, or at least push back on. Because if you're trying to defend who you are or why you do what you do when you're getting attacked, you're never going to win.
Let's talk about a couple of examples, because we are so short on time. We could talk about all these things for hours. You were telling me when we were chatting before about, it's a golf ball company or something? Because you really do have a wide scope in terms of the clients you do. So let's go to one end first. And what was really interesting about this was that you're not just giving them PR advice.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating client. It's a domestic golf ball maker. In the U.S. and in upstate New York, and I've played them. They're terrific, regular tour balls. But what they've done is they've created a genius ball. Basically, they figured out how to get all the gizmos and doodads that you need to track your ball, Bluetooth so that you don't lose it, understand the speed, the telemetry, the spin, all these other kinds of things that not only can help you in terms of the way that you're practicing, but also can gamify golf in a different way. Like, it's not just, oh, I outdrove you by 10 yards. It's, my ball was going 20 miles an hour faster, or my spin was better, whatever. Like, it allows people to potentially
get loads of data now.
Yeah. I mean, there's already enough betting on golf courses, but now you've even introduced a whole nother level of betting, but also on the training aspect of it. And we initially started working with them with the mandate sort of to help them get some press so that they could raise some money so that they could, get to the next level.
Because this was a brand new product, right?
Yeah, brand new product, does not exist. It's not available yet. Hopefully it will be in the near future. I'm looking forward to it being available in the near future. We kind of recognized early on that with the way the media works now, it's not get press to raise money. Like, it's raise money to get some press to raise some more money. Mm-hmm. So being that my business partner, Frank DeMarie, and I have kind of been doing this for a very long time and very in interesting worlds that we've kind of floated in and out of over the last, for me, 20 years, for him, closer to 30 years. We recognize that it's not just comms advice that we're giving. We can actually be giving like advice, more kind of in the vein of what a McKinsey or Bain are going to be doing, but without the spreadsheets and PowerPoints, kind of just talking to people one-on-one with real world experience, as opposed to, kind of this, ethereal, classroom idea, or what AI is telling them what to do. So that's sort of like where we try to position ourselves as our clients. We're not just your comms advisors. Like, we have a lot of business experience. We've had a lot of experience kind of in a variety of different mandates under different contexts, from horrible, global crisis situations to the most complicated M&A situations to bankruptcies, IPOs, regular CEO transitions, whatever else it is. So ordinarily, when we're working with startups, scale-ups, mid-sized companies, which is kind of where we are, the target market for us, we came around to the idea that we can be advising them in a much better way than just saying, well, you should change this comma in the press release.
I just think this is really interesting the way you're approaching this. I've heard more and more people taking this kind of approach. But one of the things that gets me sometimes with comms is that people are just trying to push out a story rather than generate a good story first. And what you're doing here is you're producing a solid foundation, which is then far more pitchable to the media. Rather than just go, oh, we've got an announcement. So what? Everyone's got an announcement. We've got an announcement with substance, and you're helping them build that. That makes so much sense.
It is. I mean, at this point, because of kind of the way that the media has consolidated, merged, disappeared, particularly on the local level, not just in the U.S., but I think globally. Yeah. You can't just approach a reporter with a story. You've got to have, it can't just be here's a thing. It's got to be a whole story, beginning, middle, and end. Who's the hero, who's the victim, who's winning, who's losing. You got to go back to that kind of like classic Greek mythology sort of framework. And to do that, you have to put a lot of pieces in place before that thing can go out. So it's not client calls you on Tuesday and they want to be in a main publication on the next Tuesday. It's, all right, we got to go back to brass tacks. We got to understand what your business model is, what you're thinking, and we're going to question some of those assumptions that your business model is based on. And that's not going to be a great conversation potentially, but that's what needs to happen if we're going to be able to create a story that we can go out to journalists with that's going to get enough attention to actually make a difference to your bottom line.
This is fascinating. I want to talk about it more, but I actually want to move very quickly on to another example that we were talking about. Now, we've got to be a little bit careful. We can't go into detail about, obviously, the brand name and all that. But you were dealing in a different country. And this is, I mean, maybe if you can give us an outline, but there's a lot of communication challenges here. Give us the basics.
Yeah, so we were brought in to work with a client. It's a Marine veteran who had been severely injured in Iraq and had recognized that there was a tremendous business opportunity to build natural gas-fired power plants in a Far East country. I apologize to your listeners that I'm being this obtuse, but this is sort of just the way that we have to do it. Yeah. Far East country is a communist country. Not particular. A surprising thing to us was not particularly well known to some of the decision makers on the U.S. side, and I'll come back to that in a second. But what started as sort of, this is a really interesting story. Here's a guy who went and fought in Iraq, and he recognized that the value of energy is more than just money; it's actually lives. And if you can help another country increase their energy flow, which in this case needed to be natural gas because nuclear wasn't an option and solar is not an option, and hydro is sort of tapped out in that situation. Meanwhile, this is a country that's getting a huge influx in manufacturing demand as companies rapidly leave China. Some are Chinese companies leaving China and looking for other places to manufacture. So it was not just introducing the company on sort of the media scale, and it wasn't just introducing them into the country, the target country. It was, you had to develop a reputation kind of out of nowhere because they didn't actually have an asset at that point. We worked very closely with a government affairs firm in DC that we have a very, very strong relationship with and think the world of. But it was also like, what's the story that we're going to go tell members of the administration or members of Congress or their staff that aren't necessarily going to help us at the end of the day, but it's going to give us a little bit of gravitas when we actually go talk to this foreign country to try to get the license or whatever else it might be. So it's a lot of moving chess parts, but it's also kind of recognizing that there's an end game and there's a lot of things that have to happen. And I think one of the things that I've sort of seen over my career is that all too often, particularly in crisis situations, but I think in general, corporate communications situations, the other side isn't given enough gravity. The other side has their own decisions to make, and you have to adjust around that. Just because your plan is from A to B doesn't mean it needs to go to A and a half, A and 3/4 to B, right? But you need to be thinking about that to properly advise your client. They may not like that because it means that there's more things to get from where they are to where they want to be, but that's just the reality of how things work.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the real challenge you had here was trying to influence that foreign government, and so. But like with any story, you're building the evidence steps, and part of that was getting US support to add weight to that argument, right? But how did you approach? Because presumably you obviously you don't come from that other country, so how did you approach understanding what they would need to hear in order to kind of get this over?
So a lot of that was coming from the client themselves and their advisors in that foreign country. Some of it was coming from folks that we talked to who have knowledge of that foreign country or kind of knowledge of how those countries work. And it was sort of, you're going from zero, you're trying to get to 0 to 100 very, very quickly to get to get the license that you need to build the gas-fired power plant or whatever other infrastructure that they might be going after, which the mandate expanded into other infrastructure projects. But it was kind of a dual path of, all right, let's get attention paid on the U.S. government side so that there's some folks that might be able to write a letter or demonstrate support or whatever else it might be, while at the same time go at the media and try to find opportunities for a profile or a quote here or there. So very complicated.
Elie, listen, we've got to cover this in more detail, so you must come back. Just very quickly, if people want to get hold of you, how can they do that?
Go to our website, purposefuladvoscardavidvictor.com. And that's how they can
put that in the show notes. I'll put that on LinkedIn as well, but I'll put that in the show notes on the audio version too. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to speak again very soon, Elie.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Looking forward to it too.